right. So, good news and bad news. Good news is that we have new project teaming announced on the canvas. So, now we have 14 teams. The other good news is that there won't be any there won't be any term project. There will be 3 more homeworks, right. So, we were initially supposed to have 4 homeworks. We had 2 homeworks done already and 2 more were due, and then instead of having a team project, I looked at the last year's team projects and I didn't like what I saw. So, I said, okay, so this is not going to be very useful project. So, I have decided to make it 3 projects. The other good news is now you can do this 3 assignments or projects whatever in groups of 5, 6 rather than groups of 3, right. So, you will have 14 groups as you can find on Canvas. The bad news is, what that means is that your final grade will be highly dependent on your exams, right. And as you know that the exam results were pretty abysmal as expected, because you can see that out of 83 here I have maybe 13 students, and questions are such that if you do not listen to the lectures, you won't be able to answer anything, right. So, by just reading the slides. So, having said that, let us move on, and also let me show you where we are with respect to the curriculum. So, I have we are now, so I missed a week of classes, and then Nanda did 2 weeks of classes. So, I might have to do extra classes later in the semester, maybe after the midterm break, to cover some of these. This is the current week. In this week, I am hoping to get done with the risk assessment and cyber crisis exercise, and then I have to do resilience, cyber resilience, which will take another this week. There is a break, unfortunately here. This is a big problem, but we'll manage. And then I have 3 more weeks here. So, resilience might take 1 week here also. Resilience will take probably 2 weeks, and then we can handle sticks maybe in the next week, and then if there is need, I will also do an extra 1 or 2 classes to cover the zero trust. So, that should take care of the content of the syllabus. Also, I have posted, I have put out the recordings that are being done on this YouTube links. So, you can watch, well, you are watching it here in live. So, you tell your friends that they can watch it at the comfort of their bed, but that's the advantage we have, that we have the recordings as well. In any case, I think let us move on with the what we were covering. So, if you remember from last week, we were talking about risk assessment, and we talked about the risk assessment requires you to model the threats that are possibly going to harm your business or affect your business processes, and then we have to figure out whether your system has vulnerabilities such that those threats actually can be realized, and then we have to figure out if the threat gets realized, what would be the impact or consequence. And once you have those 3 threats and vulnerabilities, you can estimate the likelihood for a particular threat to actually be realized, and then you find the impact based on the importance of that particular assets or asset that would be affected by that particular threat being realized, and what would be the impact, reputational, financial, business, health and safety of humans, and environmental, all kinds of effects might be there. So, that would be your process for risk assessment. And we also saw that this is done using various metrics, or what we call risk metrics, and also most of the time for cyber risk assessment we actually do this in a very qualitative manner rather than quantitative manner. We kind of estimate it as low, high, low, moderate, medium, low, medium, high, etc. And then we decide what would be the combination of the likelihood and impact strength, and finally decide the risk rating of various assets. So, now how to do risk assessment, cyber risk assessment? There are a number of different methodologies. One is the NIST methodology. When we started talking about the NIST methodology, you can also find this document easily on the internet, SP 800-30, which is the NIST Risk Management Guide for Information Technology Systems. And we talked about the steps. You have to understand the system, assets, and what assets are there, what their characteristics are. For example, what operating system they are running, what patch level they have, what applications are running, how these assets are connected to each other, whether they are all in the same network or whether the network has been segmented, all kinds of stuff. And then you have to figure out what threats are incident on your system or possibly incident on your system, and then vulnerability identification. And then you have to see whether you have enough mitigating control, and if you do not, or whatever mitigating control you have, considering those, you have to figure out what is the likelihood of a particular threat being actually exercised on your system. And then you have to figure out what the impact would be if that threat actually affects a particular asset or set of assets. And from there you do risk assessment, and then you have to say, okay, if this risk is acceptable by the organization. If not, then you have to say what controls needs to be there, what controls need to be there to actually mitigate the risk, to reduce the overall risk to every asset to its acceptable risk level. And then of course, you have to provide documentation. And this is what these steps are, inputs and outputs of each step, right. So, we discuss this, that here we talk about in the system characterization requires you to basically collect the asset inventory, right. So, hardware, software, various applications, system interfaces, people are also assets and all that. And then you have to see what are the system boundaries, what are the system functions, and criticality, etc., etc. So, you see what data is there, whether that is a personally identifiable data. If that is the case, then it has very high criticality already. So, all this characterization, if a particular server is actually your database server which has your critical data, then that server itself becomes critical. If a particular server is actually providing the functionality required by your organization's business, and if that server goes down, you do not have a failover server, then you will have a problem that your business will be interrupted by a crash of that server. So, you have to declare that server as critical. On the other hand, somebody's desktop, some engineer's desktop may or may not be critical depending on what they are doing. So, all this information needs to be characterized, right. Then you have to figure out what are the threats that are possible, right. So, for example, you have to know history of the threats, history of attacks, what kind of attacks have happened. You get threat intelligence from threat intelligence organizations, like what is in your type of business, what are the threats are happening currently, like is a lot of, like if you are a bank, lot of ransomware happening in the banks, lot of the unauthorized access of accounts may be happening. So, basically if you are not too imaginative, these things will help you to imagine what threats are possible, right. If you are imaginative, you could be actually thinking of not only the threats that are possible from the threat intelligence sources you get, but you might actually get additional thoughts that none of that hasn't happened yet, right. So, you can also think of such things. And so, then you get the threat basically statements. Then for vulnerability identification, you have to basically have reports from auditors or VAPT reports, as well as you get the national vulnerability database and match it against your applications and operating systems and firmware, etc., that for which vulnerability is known. And then you get the list of vulnerabilities. And then for the control analysis, you will actually get the current controls, like where do you have firewall, where do you have IDS, whether the network is segmented, whether there are endpoint protection and detection on every endpoint, whether there is network intrusion detection, whether there is anti-malware, whether there is strong authentication and authorization practices, whether the people have been properly trained not to fall victim to phishing. All these things will be part of your control, right. So, you say, okay, these are my controls, and so in an organization where there has never been any training of personnel on cyber security about phishing and everything, the likelihood that some people will fall victim to phishing and actually get infected has to be high. Whereas in an organization that repeatedly do phishing drills and repeatedly give awareness training, etc., they might put the likelihood of a phishing based compromise to be low or medium, right. So, that is the kind of decision that has to be made in the control analysis. Then you get the list of current and planned control. So, you can also decide that, okay, like tomorrow I am going to get this new, well, not tomorrow, but next week we are going to get this new firewall. So, it may be also considered as a mitigating factor to affect the likelihood. So, at this point you have the threats, you have the vulnerabilities, and you have the controls, and then you can estimate what are the likelihood of all the threat vulnerability pair, right. Not every threat vulnerability pair are actually even possible. So, there the likelihood would be 0, and then you have to do the impact analysis, like what is the loss incurred by a compromise of a particular asset, and this impact analysis will also determine which assets are in the critical business path and which asset is not in the critical business path. So, certain servers, certain database servers, certain network equipments may be in the critical business path. If one of them gets affected, maybe the entire business process will be interrupted or fail. So, in such cases the impact will be considered high, but if it is a kind of something on the side, not necessarily in the critical business process, an asset is not involved in the critical business process, then the impact will be low. And then you can do the risk, use the risk matrix to do the risk determination, and then so here you have the likelihood estimation, you have the statements of impact, etc., and the controls, and then you can do the risk determination, and then you say, okay, here is your risk for this assets, these are high risks, these are medium risk, these are low risk, and then you tell the organization that is it acceptable to you, and the organization has a particular preference or particular decision already made by its management, what is the acceptable risk. If you can quantify the risk like in terms of dollars, that is easier for the management to understand, like if this happens, then you will be the loss can go into tens of millions, versus if this happens, the loss can go into hundreds of thousands. Maybe you will say, okay, 100,000 I can accept, because the mitigating control you are suggesting will cost me similar money. So, I would rather wait for something like this to happen, which is not a good idea, but people think like that. And then you have to do the final determination. So, this is what a risk assessor will go into an organization and do this kind of stuff, right. So, so this is the risk assessment requires various stakeholders. So, you cannot get answers to all questions by just talking to the CISO or by just talking to one IT, head of the IT or something. So, it requires the information security people like CISO's team, it requires the management and user, and then it requires the information technology people who will actually do the mitigating control and reduce the risk, right. So, will actually implement the recommendations that you make, right. So, risk assessment is an important component nowadays. All regulators, including the insurance regulator, the stock market regulator, SEBI, the banking regulator, RBI, everybody requires their regulated entities to do risk assessment, right. They earlier what used to happen is that people used to say, the regulators used to say that you have to do these controls. You have to have firewall, you have to have strong authentication, two-factor authentication, you have to have network segmentation, you have to have encryption for data at rest, you have to have encryption for data in transit, you have to have antivirus in every endpoint. All these things used to be listed as regulation, right, cybersecurity regulation. But now it has been understood by people that if you have, if you are a bank for example, you have tens of thousands of endpoints. You have multiple branches, you may have hundreds of branches and hundreds of networks, and you have all these kinds of databases and servers and development machines and all the stuff which are connected in the network. Now, if you ask them to do all these things without doing a risk assessment, then they will actually spread their overall budget thin on everything, right. But what you want to do is that you want to put the bigger proportion of your budget to assets that are very critical, that are cyber critical, whereas you can do less for non-critical ones. So, it is very important to do actually the risk assessment, right, not blindly do uniform cybersecurity across the entire organizational assets. So, what this says is, this is again from the NIST risk assessment document. So, some of the critical success factors for good risk assessment is actually, first thing is that you have to have, and this is very important, and maybe you will not appreciate this at this point because you might not have worked in a real industry or corporate environment, but getting senior management actually to actually get involved is very difficult, especially think in something like cyber security. All the things are changing because lots of attacks are happening nowadays. So, top management are getting nervous, they are always worried that something like a ransomware attack may happen, or something like a PII, the personally identifiable information may be stolen of its customers. So they are getting more and more involved, but it is very critical that they get involved, not only because they have to first agree to do a risk assessment, right. So for example, you cannot get an organization like IIT top management to agree to do a risk assessment, right. So because sometimes we don't want to know that we have a disease, right. So like my mother doesn't want to go to the doctor because she is worried that doctor will say you have this disease, and then she will have to take medicine and all that stuff. So same thing happens in organization where you have unless the regulator requires you to do risk assessment, you do not do risk assessment. So top management has to agree to go through a risk assessment, because it involves a lot of stakeholders, time and budget, right. It also they have to also designate the focal points, like who will be involved, who will be responsible for what, and define the procedures, right. What should be the procedures. See, if you do not get it from the top management, then if you go to a particular sub-organization and ask them for all the asset data and what kind of past attacks they have seen and all that stuff, nobody is going to tell you, right. So you have to have a top-down, requirement to actually fulfill in order to get such information. Then getting business and technical experts. Now important thing is that business experts are also required, because they can only tell you whether this particular asset, whatever business process this particular asset is involved in, if that part of the business is crucial for the company, right. A company may have many business processes. Now not everything is as crucial as others in terms of funds and all that, in terms of income and all that stuff. Holding business units responsible, limit the scope of individual assessments, so that it does not get a complete, going into the depth of things which are not required. And documentation and maintenance of the results from one risk assessment cycle to the next is very important. The tools that are used are mostly tabular, but there often are questionnaires are used to collect data, report formats, software to facilitate documentation and analysis, and lists of threats and controls. So there are a number of risk assessment tools nowadays in the market. There are some startups that we CTI Hub support, which has built or building risk assessment tools, right. Similarly, there are companies like RiskLens, which has now been bought by Cybersecurity. There is a organization called FAIR Institute, which is a risk assessment methodology school of thought. So there are lots of different tools nowadays for helping the risk assessors to gather information. See, eventually it's a lot of manual work. It has to, it cannot be fully automated, that I plug in agent on every device on the system that gives me data and I get a risk, I can get a sort of a risk indicator through that, but I cannot get a full-fledged risk assessment through that. There is also sort of the set of processes, as you have seen, like identifying threats, identifying vulnerabilities, identifying criticality of assets based on their importance in the business process, cost of mitigating controls, all that stuff. Of course, there is benefit of risk assessment. We have been saying that why we need to do risk assessment. We need to understand where to actually put our security budget. So that's what it is. Now let's look at very quickly through some case studies. These case studies are not very elaborate, but it will give you some idea. So here is a regulatory organization that is trying to do its risk assessment. And the goal for doing the risk assessment is to actually to face any risk, and they are concerned with the loss of customer confidence and monetary and productivity losses. Now, as I said before, that the term risk is often overloaded, right. So, the term risk, when we say risk assessment and versus when we use the term risk on an everyday sense, are quite different. For example, if we are driving, we say that we have a risk of an accident, right. But actually risk is supposed to be a measure of that particular threat being realized and the impact, right. So, the risk, if you are the sole bread earner of your family, the risk is higher, right. Whereas, if you are not that, now risk is not higher. Now, this is a very controversial statement, because for whoever you are, for your parents and your children or wife or husband, you are very important. So, I shouldn't estimate that in those terms, but in terms of economy that is the case. But in any case, so here when they say that they want to face any risk, what they mean is they want to face any threat, not risk, right. Because so these are threats, that they will lose customer confidence, or they will have monetary loss, or they will have productivity loss, etc. These are actually threats. Now, so risk assessment. So, this is an organization that has been doing risk assessment for as a part of their regular business, and the level of risk associated with the various business processes are actually a regular part of assessment. Now, the organization has a central office and regional office, and the central office actually decides whether what are the requirements, what are the processes and rules for risk assessment for the entire organization, and regional offices actually get it done for all the business units that are within the regional office. And the organization policy guideline says that the business units has to conduct risk assessment at least once a year, or when a new business operation or some kind of significant operational changes happen, right. So, this is a normal rule for most organizations, that either you do it, you do it periodically, but in case you are going to have a significant change in your organization. For example, you change and you add a new type of business. Earlier you were only doing brick and mortar business, you decide to also do e-commerce business, right. So, that is a significant change, and you want to do a risk assessment at this point of time. So, that is the periodicity, and here is the this picture kind of shows you what are the different activities and what are the, who is responsible, right. So, as you can see that the business unit manager, he is decides the assessment scope and the who is responsible for the assessment, and then you have the rest of the thing, like evaluation of threat, evaluation of vulnerability, figuring out the impact, etc. These are all done by the team members. So, there is nothing interesting to see in this diagram. And then here is what the organization decided as its areas of vulnerabilities, and then the kind of damages that can happen. So, here you can see that areas of vulnerabilities are like personnel, who are probably the biggest concern in many organizations. Then you have the various facilities and you have various applications, the communication, and you eventually you have the software and operating system. And the type of damage that you can see is the unauthorized disclosure, right. So, so they are more it's an information organization, right. So they don't sell probably any products or something. So they have unauthorized information disclosure and or modification. So unauthorized disclosure is confidentiality breach, modification is integrity breach, and then you have the destruction of information. So that's an availability breach. You have inadvertent disclosure modification. So the difference between the two is that one is willful, malicious, breach of confidentiality, integrity, etc. The other one is inadvertent, which can happen if you are not, if you do not have the right control, such as for example, if you do not have backups, then you can have inadvertent destruction of information. If you do not have hashes or some other way to actually have the integrity checks, then you might have inadvertent modification. If you do not keep the data in encrypted form, then you may have inadvertent disclosure, right. So those are kind of things that can happen. Non-delivery or misdelivery of service, that can happen. If either because of malicious activities or because something went wrong, and denial or degradation of service, right. So these are the damages that can happen by virtue of either employees being targeted, or by virtue of some software being targeted, some application being targeted, or some communication channels being targeted, or some facility being targeted. So that's this is a very high level risk assessment, not at the level of level in which we actually go for CVEs and very specific threat scenarios. So this will give you a very high level idea about the risks. And the consequences are basically monetary loss, production loss, and loss of customer confidence. So these are the consequences. Now the question is that how do you determine the risk level? So we'll go through this matrix method. So this is a very high level risk assessment. So as you can see that on the left hand side, that is on the rows, you have the various vulnerability areas like people, application, software, facility, etc. And for each of these you have this various threats. So it's a threat vulnerability pair, right. So threat vulnerability pair is on the rows, and on the columns you have the likelihoods, and the likelihoods are high, medium, low. But instead of computing the likelihood on all together, they are actually doing it with respect to 3 different parameters. That is, what is the likelihood of monetary loss, what is the likelihood of production loss, and what is the likelihood of the loss of customer confidence. So by filling this table, they can then actually summarize this table, right. So they will basically summarize for each area of vulnerability what is the risk, because if the monetary loss is low and the productivity loss is high and loss of customer confidence is high, then maybe you will put the overall risk as high. So this is the way they are computing the overall risk. So this, and then you have to find what controls you should have for protection against this losses, and then eventually somebody has to take action, and then this action will be then checked by the same team that did the risk assessment to see whether the risk has come down. Now from this analysis can you actually do something actionable? So, this analysis does not tell you anything about its actual assets, organizational IT assets, right. It does not tell you what are the what is the network architecture, right. It does not tell you what is the what kind of information it possesses, right. It does not tell you anything about the patches and versions of any of the software, firmware, hardware, etc. So, therefore, when we are doing this decisions like application, right. So, we are saying that okay, so unauthorized disclosure, modification and destruction of information, we are saying let us say the corresponding likelihood of monetary loss is high, right. But we are not really knowing whether this is even possible, maybe that likelihood is 0, right. So, I am just doing it at a very high level, right, at the level where we are assuming the worst. We are saying that okay, so if there is an application which is important for a business process, then if discloses any information like this, then maybe my monetary loss will be high or customer confidence loss will be very high. But it does not really say what this particular organization, what is the vulnerability in this organization that will lead to this kind of disclosure, right. So, this is what is called a very high level risk assessment, and this basically shows that this basically only shows that in the worst case, provided there is no control really, and provided there is all the software etc. are outdated and they have vulnerabilities, then what would happen, right. So, this kind of analysis you can get from at this level, but without having a realistic picture, which is called which is a detailed risk analysis. So, detailed risk analysis will require you to have the asset inventory, exact version of all the software, hardware, firmware. You have to get the from the NVD database, you have to get the vulnerabilities, you have to get the vulnerabilities that your last audit report had mentioned and you have not fixed yet. You have to have the full detail of the what controls you already have, then only you can do this analysis, right. That is the detailed analysis, and detailed analysis will give you the nuanced differences between multiple different servers. They will have different criticality, but in this everything is going to be either critical or non-critical, right. So, this is a very high level risk assessment. The another one is also a very high level, but here it is actually not even a proper risk assessment. It is actually the goal is to have a security plan. So, this is a university which wants to decide whether it has a adequate security plan, right, cyber security plan for information, because unlike India, in the US student information is protected information. In the US, you cannot, if your parent came to me and asked your grade, I cannot tell you without your consent. Here I can tell your grade to your parents if they ask, and they do ask sometimes, but in the US I could not have done without the consent of the student, because students are above 18 in the university and I cannot say. So, there is a law, federal law that so student information is very critical and important. Their grades and their all other their social security number, roll number, their address, everything is and when that law was enacted, I remember we were given special software by the university to scrub our emails, because our past emails might have information in which a student's name and his roll number might be in the same email. That was no longer allowed. So, if a student name is there, no other information that relates to a database key was allowed, right. So, we had to scrub all our emails and everything, all the files in our personal desktops to actually make sure that there is no file in which a student's name and roll number are in the same document, right. So, I can have a document in which roll number and grade are in the same document, but if the name is also there, then it will become risk. So we have to scrub. So this is the situation. So, under this situation, let us say a university like Arizona State University, it is trying to actually do a protection of the information, right. So, security and confidentiality of the information. So, they want to protect against anticipated threats or hazards to the security and integrity of the information. Unauthorized access they do not want. So, they do not want somebody accessing. So, there was a case in the US where a student he actually put a keylogger on machines in the library, all the machines. The library had a lot of machines, and this is some time ago. So, at that time people actually would go to a library website, a library computer, and do some work there. No longer anybody would do that. So it seems professors went, this is in Colorado. So, professors went to the library and accessed the grade database with the professor's login, and there was no two-factor login. And this student, using the keylogger, got all the passwords from all the professors, and then what he did is that he changed all his grades to A, right. Now, his name came in the dean's list. When his name came in the dean's list, all the professors who noticed, they were like very surprised, because this was a student who they thought was a F student, and they got, he seems to have a 4 out of 4 GPA. So, then they started digging, and they figured out in the logs that somebody went and just changed that guy's grade in multiple different courses to A. Now, if the student was clever, he would have done something clever, that he could have given himself C in everything. Then he would not come in dean's list, and no professor would be noticing it. But unfortunately, he went a little too aggressive, and therefore he actually got caught, right. So this is what we do in intrusion detection. We always try to do the stealthy intrusion, that the intrusion should go under the radar. It should not be like so anomalous that the detection system can trigger alert, right. So, in any case, the student got obviously went to jail and everything, and interestingly it was an Indian origin student, right. So, but anyway, so this is what we want to do. Unauthorized access we want to stop, and we want the mechanism to identify and access the risks for the protection of this information, and we want to designate employees who are responsible for coordinating the security program. We want to also design and implement a safeguard program, manage the selection of appropriate service providers, like who would be a firewall vendor, who will be my intrusion detection vendor, who would be my SOC and SIEM vendor, antivirus vendor, etc., and adjust the plan to reflect changes in technology. So, the plan has to be dynamically adapted as technology changes, threat landscape changes, and so on and so forth. So, that's what the organization wants to do. And then organization, then first thing they have to do is that figure out where the risks are. So, when it says what are the internal external risks, what they mean is again misuse of the term. It should be like threats. What are the internal and external threats that are there, and so you can easily imagine what would be the internal and external threats: unauthorized access, inadvertent disclosure, interception of data during transmission, loss of data integrity, errors introduced in the system, corruption of data or systems, physical loss of data in a disaster like a flood or hurricane or tornado, etc. So, they commissioned a risk assessment, and and they figured out that okay, so risk assessment may not get a complete list of threats, because you, as I said, that some threats you can model or imagine based on threat intelligence reports or threat intelligence feeds, past attacks, etc. But certain things may be totally new, and you might not have thought about that, like the student putting keyloggers on the library desktops was not thought about before that happened, right. So you may not have a complete list, but you try to do a comprehensive threat modeling, right. So you want to understand what are the directions from which attacks may come. And then they figured out that since the technology growth is not static, so new risks are new threats, basically what they mean, are created regularly, and accordingly the officers of the technology office and office of student affairs will create an advisory committee of experts, and then they will be having representatives from various departments, and they will be always having regular evaluation of risks by considering new threats and new vulnerabilities, and maybe they will have new business processes. For example, the university earlier might not have online teaching, they might have added online teaching, so that would be a new technology, new source of threat and new source of vulnerability, and therefore they have to worry about that. So who is responsible for assessing the risk? So technology officer with the advisory committee, they will include representatives from all the departments, and which department will be providing annual update report about its safeguarding procedure. So this is what is called the cybersecurity governance, right. So cybersecurity, as I said that, well, I don't know if I said it or not, but I should have said that cybersecurity is about three things: people, process, and technology, right. So technology is one thing that you normally do in terms of intrusion detection, in terms of firewall, and in terms of endpoint protection detection or antivirus. You do from SIEM, SOC, all kinds of things. But people and process are also equally important, and cybersecurity governance is very, very important, and this is all about governance, right. Now, what I want to, what you will see in the maybe in the next week, not this week, is that we also, the NIST framework, the National Institute of Standards and Technology has a cybersecurity framework, and in the framework they actually have added, so they used to have 5 functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Now they have added govern. So governance is very, very important, and what this is talking about is governance. Anyway, so this is where I'll stop in terms of risk assessment. You get the basic idea of risk assessment, but you will get better idea when the homework is released, and you will be doing the homework, and you will actually facing the issues that a risk assessor will face, and then you will get a better understanding of risk assessment. So we'll stop the risk assessment here, and we'll move on to the cyber crisis exercise in the next class.